Hi everyone, welcome to Module 4, Chapter 2 of our course materials, A Brief History of the American Social Welfare System. The module is about the role of religion in social welfare policy. What does religion contribute to the American social welfare system? For these slides, I want you to watch this video that talks about American capitalism. So you understand what it's saying. The objectives of this chapter are three main ones, which are consistent with the Council on Social Work Education. The first objective is analyze how the Judeo-Christian Protestant values have influenced social welfare policy in the American social welfare system. Two, understand the impact of Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism. The sociologist theorist Max Weber put forward the theory or the concept of spirit of capitalism. If I were you, I'd look him up and see how he defined the spirit of capitalism. And three, the chapter requires you to understand the impact of past movements of social welfare policy. There have been historical movements that have been the precedent of what we have here today. Now, let's look at the regional differences in wealth and how these differences might shape the social welfare system. In this graph, you see that we have countries that have very big wealth and others that have very small wealth gap. For example, here you see that the biggest here is in blue, which is North America. Then the next one is Europe. And then, of course, the continent of Africa has a very small wealth, the wealth possession, if you will, lack of a better word. Why is this important? It's important because the global wealth between 2000 and 2016 has been shifting, has been a constant change. What has influenced that global wealth? And why is it that certain continents are richer than the others? The millionaires by region, for example, you see in this graph is that we have, for a long time, Europe has been having a very steep rise of millionaires. Then it dipped here, and then it went up again. When you look at North America, it started rising, and then around 2008, it dipped. I think this was during the economic downturn, and now it has moved upwards, is surpassing now Europe. Understand how those millionaires sometimes may influence policy and how they impact social welfare policy. I mentioned earlier on about Protestant work ethics. What is it? The Protestant work ethics and the spirit of capitalism, which was theory put forward by Max Weber. He mentioned that there were three doctrines that shaped Protestant work ethics. Marx argued that capitalism, being a free market system, resulted from religious reformation and Protestant work ethics at the time. This created, of course, we had Protestantism, Catholicism, and Islam. And so when he compared these three, religions, he realized that Protestants did very well economically because of what he referred to the Protestant work ethics. This was better than Catholics, better than Islam, because Catholics and Muslims did not have what he referred as the spirit of capitalism and the work ethics that the Protestants have had. And I'm going to explain that as we move forward. So let's look at what was happening in Europe in 1500. Europe, or before 1500, was a very feudal, small, competing mini kingdoms. It was agrarian. It was not coin money or the system of monetary we have today. land, power, and money were at the time controlled by the Catholic Church. Basically, the Pope controlled money, power through the barter system. And we had what we call the selling of indulgences. What that meant was that if you were able to buy yourself out, literally, you could buy yourself into heaven because of what you did. But around 1600, things began to change. We have now the introduction of the coin system. And what does that do? One figure that we need to understand how he changed this Protestant work ethics was the emergence of Martin Luther in 1517. Martin Luther was a Catholic priest and a friar. The priest and friars basically commit to leading a life of poverty, right? They involve in a life of poverty without having a lot of possessions. What Martin Luther did, he condemned the Pope, and rightly so, because he believed that the Pope had no place of selling indulgences. And so how did he do that? He pinned down 95 offenses or grievances that he, as he called them, and nailed them on the door of the church, lamenting on what the Pope was doing and how the selling of these indulgences was unchristian, not consistent with what Jesus Christ had taught. Of course, he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. He started therefore to write about what does it constitute to have saintly work, meaning holy work. And so he proposed that every work was good work, and that if you worked very hard, you are going to prosper. Around the same time, we had John Calvin. Calvinism, as we call them, was about the doctrine of predestination, that each one of us has a book of life, that you are either in the book of life or not in the book of life. In other words, you are predestined for success or for failure. You are predestined to go to heaven or not. That you do not earn salvation. Nothing can be done about it. Can you imagine if you come to the world and you have your life already predestined? Basically, that was the teaching of John Calvin. So how do I prove myself that I am in the book of life? You prove yourself by being successful, doing very well in business, making sure that you are successful. Does that sound familiar in terms of prosperity gospel? So Protestantism can be divided into a number of groups. One group is the Methodists group. Methodists come from the word method. What did it teach? Methodists taught that you should live your life with a plan, that your life has to have a method, that God does not like disorganized Christian. And so the goal of a Christian is to have a plan, be organized. Then we have the Presbyterians. Presbyterians get their name from presby, which means elderly. This was a group run by elders. The Presbyterians taught frugal, live a frugal life, do not waste. So the seeds of modern day Protestantism were based on four things. That if you work hard, being that method of your life, if you are frugal, if you have a plan like Methodist, you'll be successful. What happens to people who do not do these four things? If they don't work hard, if they're not frugal, if they do not have a plan, of course you can see how the thinking goes. So the thinking basically will be like, if you are poor and successful and not be able to have prosperity, you are not working very hard, you are not frugal, you are not disciplined, you don't have a plan. And that was the thinking that informed even our social welfare system. a system that defines people either because of their station in life, or where they were born, or what zip code they were born in, or what kind of inadequacies they may have, whether they have mental illnesses. It doesn't consider that. Pascal says, well, you are what you are simply because maybe you are not disciplined enough. So our social welfare system is informed by this foundational egalitarianism of sharing. And where does that come from? It comes from founded on the societal structure that is actually in the Judeo-Christian faith, the act of sharing. And the book gives an example of, am I my brother's keeper? If you are a Christian, perhaps you recall the story between Cain and Abel, where Cain had murdered Abel, and God asked him, where is your brother? And of course, Cain responds, am I my brother's keeper? So the social welfare system constantly asks you, are you your brother's keeper as a Christian? If you believe, therefore, in the story of Cain and Abel, you should therefore be asking yourself, does the policy that you are advocating for try to keep your brother from harm, right? Does it advocate treating your brother who has a mental illness, for example, with the healthcare that he needs? Am I my brother's keeper? If your brother is hungry, do you advocate, if you believe in this Judeo-Christian principle, if your brother is hungry, do you advocate that he should get food stamps, for example? Is SNAP program a good program to help that brother? Right? So you have so many examples that you can tell, but remember, our system is based on this Judeo-Christian principle. Back in 2018, last year, the Pew Research Council conducted a survey. And the survey was a really large representative sample of 35,000 adults from all 50 states. And they asked these adults whether they belonged to any religious affiliations. You can see that the majority of Americans said they were Christians, almost 71%. The rest were other faiths. So today, over 80% of Americans' population report some level of religion, either it is Muslims or Christian. They have, some affiliation to religion. Over 90% report a belief in the existence of a supreme being. And because of that, more than $335 billion are donated by churches and charitable organizations. This is almost 2% of our gross domestic product. So we are essentially a very religious society. So in a nutshell, the roots of social welfare go deep into the Judeo-Christian tradition. That's what has shaped our social welfare system. So societal structures in ancient Judaism, right, they created protections for the most powerless. So we basically copied that we must have some protection for the powerless, the poor, the orphan, the widow. When we started having the dominance of Christianity in Europe, people identified themselves with the church, with the state, especially during that time. Of course, the Church of England is the official religion of the United Kingdom. The book discusses at length about the English Poor Laws, which basically began in 1600. These were about the social relief in England, and offerings or social welfare was considered a private and a church matter. Despite private philanthropy, the main burden of the poor rested on the shoulders of the church. That was the Church of England. So the English government basically established what we call Elizabethan poor laws, and these were mostly administered through the churches. And so it established the responsibility of government to provide relief for the needy at the time. Now, the relief for the needy was provided through private enterprise, not so much different from today. That's why we have this argument between what's the role of government in providing social welfare. In the United States, what you need to remember is that we have what we call a residual system, where you help yourself first. If you cannot help yourself, go to your family. If your family cannot help you, go to the church or the agencies. If they cannot help you, government is the last resort. It's a residual system. And this system, basically, the thinking behind it was in this Judeo-Christian and the Elizabethan laws that were there at the time. So how did these English poor laws determine who was, eligible for welfare and who was not? There were three distinct groups or classes of dependents. The first one was needy children given to apprenticeship, that if you are a child and you didn't have, if you are poor, you are taught some kind of skills. 2, if you are able-bodied, if you have strength, you are given work. 3, there was that class of category of the worthy poor, those who are lame, blind, who have any kind of disability. Then those ones, the government would come to help them. These were the laws that formed the basis of the statutes that were enacted both the colonial and post-American colonial system. After the poor laws came a colonial America and Second Great Awakening. The book talks very extensively about the Second Awakening. It's the period between 1800 and 1830. What do you need to know in this period? You need to know what was Second Awakening. This is the time that, Martin Luther and John Calvin, postulate their views on work. They basically stated that God-fearing people must work regardless of their wage or type of employment. In other words, don't care about how much you are being paid. Don't care about what kind of work you do, whether you're a plumber or an electrician or a toilet cleaner. Work has inherent value, so work. So the Protestant work ethic basically say that poverty is a sign of God's pleasure. If you are working and you are poor, it means that God is not pleased with you. It's like the prosperity gospels that we hear today. So between 1800 and 1830, the church attendance doubled as compared to the Revolutionary era, especially Baptist and Methodist. So if the question on examinations in the quiz are asking you what period did the church attendance double, basically it's asking you about the Great Awakening period. This is the period where alcohol and new moral standards were established. The abolition movement became intricate, interweaving of religion and politics. Understand how that is happened. The New England Sabbatarian movement, which took place in 1828, sought the end of male delivery on Sunday. This was the Great Awakening. So the quiz, that's a quiz question, it's a recall question. If you asked what movement sought to end male delivery, the answer is the Sabbatarian movement of 1828. So what came out of the Second Great Awakening? There were three important things that happened during this time. One, there was this religious fervor, the religious impulse. Two, a cadre of female leaders emerged. And three, an African American clergy at the time began to form or to lead converts. His name was Ilhan Winchester. The relevance of this historical reference slide is basically to remind you as you are studying this module or this chapter, understand what the Civil War era meant in the social welfare provision, what the late 19th and early 20th centuries meant, what was social Darwinism, and what we understand by the social gospel. You can be able to refer that for yourself. They're very easy to understand. So the rise of social work as a profession. Social work as a profession has great linkage with the 19th century Judeo-Christian values. Religion and social welfare, as I mentioned, were intricately linked. They were linked very closely. Almost all forms of religion came from church groups. Major denominations that we just mentioned earlier on, the Methodist, the Presbyterian, had mechanisms of providing social welfare, including Catholics. So in order to reclaim providence, the poor must be taught to live a moral and self-disciplined life. Those were the views of religious social workers at the time. Of course, today that would be very abhorrent coming from a social worker. So distributing relief was imprudent because a reliance on charity would weaken the moral fabric. In other words, that people should fend for themselves, provide an incentive for work. If you provided charity, it would be an incentive for work. And of course, you have had the same argument made today that if you give people social welfare, you are encouraging to be just loafers, to sit on the couches and do some work. All those thoughts were from that era.